Field trips are meant to be a break from the classroom, but sometimes, the further you get from home, the closer you get to something that should have stayed hidden. Tonight, we uncover two true accounts of excursions that took a dark, unexplained turn. From a nature trail where the math stopped making sense, to a museum basement that holds more than just history. These stories might make you think twice before signing that next permission slip. Sit back, turn the lights down, and let's begin. They say you never truly know what is real until the lights go out and the silence starts to breathe. I used to think history was dead, but after that night in the museum basement, I know that some things are kept behind glass for our protection, not theirs. The day had started out like any other boring 11th grade field trip. We were visiting the Heritage Museum of Antiquities, a sprawling limestone building filled with drafty corridors and hyper-realistic exhibits. By the time we reached the subterranean life wing in the basement, the heat and the droning voice of the tour guide had finally caught up with me. I ducked into a small, dimly lit alcove behind a display of 19th century mining equipment, intending to rest my eyes for just a second while the class moved on. When I opened my eyes, the world was pitch black. The transition from a nap to total darkness is a primal kind of terror. I sat up quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs, and realized the hum of the ventilation system had cut out. The air felt heavy, stagnant, and smelled of old wax and damp earth. I reached for my phone, but my stomach dropped when I remembered I'd handed it to my friend, Leo, to hold while I climbed a replica or cart earlier. I was alone, and the museum was closed. "Hello?" I called out. My voice felt small, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the basement. I began to stumble forward, my hands brushing against cold stone walls and the rough iron of the exhibits. I knew the exit was up a flight of stairs at the end of the hall, but in the dark, every shadow looked like a doorway and every silhouette looked like a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a faint, pale light coming from the founders of the Valley Exhibitor collection of wax figures, dressed in period clothing, arranged in a dinner party scene. I hurried toward the light, thinking it might be a security station or a lingering nightlight. The scene was unsettlingly detailed. There were 6 figures seated around a long wooden table, their skin glistening under the low-intensity bulbs. I stood at the edge of the velvet rope, catching my breath. "Is anyone here?" I whispered. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the ticking of a clock or the settling of the building. It was the unmistakable sound of air moving through a throat. Hiss. Pause. Hiss. I froze. I looked at the figure closest to me, an elderly man in a tuxedo, his hand frozen in the act of pouring tea. I leaned in, my heart stopping as I watched the fine lace on his chest. It was moving, just a fraction of an inch, up and down. Primera basquet, Hawaii my sneakers, squeaking on the linoleum. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I turned to run toward the stairs, but my foot caught on the edge of a display rug, and I went down hard. From my position on the floor, I looked up at the night watchman figure standing near the exit. It was a new addition to the museum, a tribute to the men who guarded the building during the Great Depression. He was dressed in a heavy wool coat, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. I scrambled to my feet, ready to sprint past him, when a glint of light caught my eye. Perched on the wax figure's nose was a pair of bright red cat-eye glasses. My blood turned to ice. I knew those glasses. They belonged to Mrs. Gable, my history teacher. She had been wearing them all morning. She never took them off. She had a chain around her neck specifically so she wouldn't lose them. The chain was there, too. It was tangled in the coarse wool of the figure's collar. Primera está, redate night. Watchman's face. The wax looked too soft, almost wet. And then the figure's head tilted. It was a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement, the neck creaking like old leather. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I bolted for the stairs, my lungs burning as I took them 3 at a time. I reached the heavy steel doors at the top and threw my weight against them. They were locked. I pounded on the glass, screaming for help, looking back down into the darkness of the basement. Down at the bottom of the stairs, the pale light from the exhibit flickered. One by one, the founders were stepping out of their display. They didn't move like people. They moved like puppets being pulled by invisible, clumsy strings, their limbs stiff and jerky. And at the front of them was the watchman. He was walking with a heavy, tooting gait, the red glasses glinting in the dark. As he reached the foot of the stairs, he looked up. Under the brim of the hat, there were no eyes, just smooth, molded wax where a face should have been. But he was smiling, a wide, carved-out grin that stretched too far across his jaw. I found a fire extinguisher in a wall cabinet and smashed the glass of the exit door. I didn't care about the alarm. I didn't care about the cuts on my hands. I scrambled through the broken pane and ran until I hit the streetlights of the main road, flagging down a passing patrol car. The police searched the museum within 20 minutes. They found the basement exactly as it should be. The figures were all back in their displays, perfectly still. No red glasses were found. Mrs. Gable was reported missing the next morning. Her car was still in the museum parking lot, but she was nowhere to be found. I never went back, but a month later, I saw a promotional flyer for the museum's new expanded history wing. I zoomed in on the cover photo of the updated Founders exhibit. There, sitting at the head of the table, was a new female figure. She was wearing a familiar floral dress, and her hands were folded neatly on the table. She wasn't wearing her glasses, but her eyes wide and glassy looked exactly like Mrs. Gable's when she was terrified. And if you look closely at the bottom corner of the photo, you can see a small, red smudge on the floor, right where a pair of glasses might have been dropped and crushed by a heavy, waxed foot. We always jokes that our class was a tight-knit group, but that afternoon in the woods, I learned that some bonds aren't formed by friendship, but by something that refuses to be left behind. There are 20 names on the school roster, but the fog doesn't know how to count, and neither did the thing standing among us. The trip was supposed to be a standard biology excursion to Blackwood Preserve. It's a dense, ancient stretch of forest known for two things: its rare mosses and a fog so thick it feels like you're re-walking through wet wool. By 3 p.m., the sun was a faint, sickly yellow smudge behind the mist, and the air had turned unnervingly cold. Mr. Henderson, our science teacher, decided it was time to head back to the bus. He was a stickler for safety, the kind of guy who did a head count every time we moved 20 feet. "All right, everyone, line up." Ekaye Daoud, his voice sounding muffled and flat in the heavy air. "Stay close. I can't see the trail markers anymore." We huddled together on the narrow dirt path. I was near the back, shivering in my light hoodie. The woods were dead silent, no birds, no wind, just the sound of 20 pairs of boots shifting in the gravel. Mr. Hendrickson began to count, pointing his finger at each of us as he went. 1, 2, 3. He went through the lines slowly. 19, 20, 21. He paused, squinting through his fogged-up spectacles. He looked down at his clipboard, then back at the line. "Wait. Let me try that again. Stay still." He counted again. Slower this time. I watched his finger track across the group. When he reached the end of the line, his brow furrowed. 21. Who's playing a joke? Who moved? A few kids laughed nervously. We all looked around, but everyone seemed to be in their place. We were all wearing our bright blue school spirit hoodies. In the gray light, we looked like a sea of identical shadows. Maybe someone from the other class joined us. A girl named Chloe suggested. "No, the other bus left an hour ago," Henderson muttered. He looked genuinely rattled. "Okay, everyone, sound off your names, alphabetical order." As they started the roll call, a strange sensation washed over me, the feeling of being watched from a very short distance. I was standing next to my friend, Leo. I turned my head slightly and noticed a student standing directly behind Chloe, who was a few feet ahead of us. The student had their hood pulled up high, their face obscured by the shadow of the fabric and the swirling mist. They were wearing the same blue hoodie we all wore, but something about the way they stood was off. Their arms were hanging perfectly straight at their sides, and they weren't shivering despite the biting cold. Chloe, her name was called. "Here," she shouted. The person behind her didn't speak, but as soon as the next name was called, I blinked, and the figure was gone. My heart gave a sharp, painful thud against my ribs. I scanned the group, and there it was, I was standing directly behind a boy named Marcus, near the middle of the line. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice cracking. "There's someone extra." "I know that, Tyler. That's what I'm trying to figure out," Henderson snapped, his stress boiling over. "No," I whispered, pointing. "Behind Marcus." Everyone turned to look at Marcus. He spun around, his face pale. There was nothing behind him but the empty, fog-choked trail. "There's nobody there, dude," Marcus said, though his voice was trembling. "He was just there," I insisted. He moved while we weren't looking." Mr. Henderson wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Look, the fog is playing tricks on us. We need to get to the bus. Now." Everyone grab the backpack of the person in front of you. Do not let go. We formed a human chain. I was the last person in line. I reached out and grabbed Leo's bag, gripping the nylon straps until my knuckles turned white. We started moving through the trees, the silence of the woods replaced by the frantic sound of our heavy breathing. Every few yards, Henderson would stop and turn his flashlight back on us. 1, 2, 3. Each time, his voice got higher, more frantic. 21. He would shine the light toward the back, but the beam would only penetrate a few feet into the subblack mist. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I would see a face, but there was only the gray void. Then, I felt it. A hand, cold as an ice pack, settled gently on my shoulder. I froze. My entire body went numb. I was the last person in the chain. There was no one behind me. Leo had choked out, but the line was moving fast now, almost at a jog. Leo didn't hear me. I didn't want to look. Every instinct I had told me to keep my eyes forward, to keep running toward the bus. But the weight on my shoulder was heavy, and I could hear a sound right behind my ear. It wasn't breathing. It sounded like the dry, rhythmic crinkling of dead leaves. I turned my head. The person was there. They were wearing our school hoodie. But the fabric looked ancient, faded, stained with earth, and tattered at the cuffs. The hood was up, but as the teacher's flashlight swept back one last time, the light caught the space where a face should have been. It wasn't a student. It was a pale, featureless mask of gray skin, wheat too dark. Hollow pits, 4 eyes and a mouth. There was nothing more than a jagged, unmoving slit. It wasn't standing on the ground. Its feet were inches above the dirt, trailing in the air like it was suspended by a wire. I let out a strangled scream and lunged forward, slamming into Leo and knocking the entire line down like dominoes. "It's here. It's at the back," I yelled, scrambling toward the front of the group. Chaos erupted. Students began screaming and sprinting blindly through the fog toward the faint glow of the bus headlights in the distance. Mr. Henderson was shouting for order, but it was useless. We ran until our lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, finally bursting out of the tree line and onto the gravel parking lot. We piled onto the bus, the driver slamming the door shut behind us. Mr. Henderson stood in the aisle, his face ashen, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his clipboard. "Is everyone here?" he gasped. "Is everyone okay?" He started counting. 1, 2, 3. We all watched him, our eyes darting around the interior of the bus. The overhead lights were flickering. 19. 20. A collective sigh of relief broke out. Some kids started crying. Others were laughing in hysterics. We were safe. There were 20 of us. The head count was right. I sat in the very last seat, staring out the back window into the darkness of the woods. Just as the bus began to pull away, I looked down at the seat directly across the aisle from me. It was empty, but the blue school hoodie I was wearing felt tight. I looked down and realized I was holding a backpack in my lap, a backpack I didn't recognize. It was covered in mud and smelled of wet earth. I looked at the seat next to me. Sitting there, clear as day in the dim bus light, was a pair of old, muddy sneakers that didn't belong to anyone in our class. And then I heard it, from the seat directly behind me, the very last row of the bus, where no one was sitting. A soft, dry whisper, like dead leaves moving in the wind. 21. I felt the cold hand return to my shoulder. and I realized with a sickening horror that while we had made it onto the bus, the headcount hadn't changed. It just learned how to hide in plain sight.